Alright, hello there, boys and girls out there in video podcast land. This is Nick Fights. I'm actually the only artist here at Lead Based Studios. This is kind of my own home studios I've created out of my own apartment. Today I'm going to be actually working on a tattoo design that my fiance kind of inspired in me. And so I've recently been sketching it up, thinking about what I was going to get. She pitched out the idea of doing something like a pinup girl, and I kind of combined that with my original idea of maybe doing something a bit more Celtic, a bit more Norwegian, something relative to my own heritage. I've always thought about getting my family crest tattooed, so taking my idea, mixing it with her idea, I came up with this idea of having a Valkrie with some sort of Celtic knotwork behind her. Now, whenever I start off with a design, I usually start off with just a quick thumbnail sketch, something that's really loose, just gets the general idea out there, not too many specifics. Obviously very basic specifics, such as where the wings on her helmet would be, which position arms would be in, posture of the body. I would move on from a looser thumbnail and I move into a bit more detail, such as I came up with some ideas. Maybe her hair has a very strong curls to them, and they happen to be just kind of covering up the nipples, so it doesn't have to be too erotic. It can be very subtle in its imagery and its suggestion. So the wing tips of her helmet are still slightly visible, but I went a little bit more into detail of what I would do sort of as a background and adding the idea of a crest. I was thinking of coming up with some kind of shape behind it that I can kind of fill in with some sort of Celtic knotwork. So with a Celtic knotwork shield behind her, I thought I could also maybe stylize the Celtic knotwork to almost resemble like the feathers of wings kind of shooting out from behind her. So as though she was descending towards somebody and offering them help, or maybe she was currently rising up and if you didn't grab her hand, you're going to miss your chance. So something like that. So after I start off with thumbnails, even as detailed as this is, it's still extremely loose. I can usually go into a final piece from there. And sometimes if I'm really not feeling like kicking into a final piece, sometimes I just want to at least spend some more time establishing shadows. So here I've blown up the size of the image. I've done obviously even less detail of the background, but I'm more or less focused on the figure and how lighting would show up on the figure. So that way when I go to do the sketch, even with dropping in the background, I'll know whether or not the figure pops out all by itself. Is there enough harsh lighting there that you could see it from a distance and you could tell that it's a woman whose arm is up in the air and maybe one arm is down? Or much like with this sketch right here, could you see the fact that both arms are coming down? So although this was larger, doesn't necessarily mean it's more finished, doesn't even mean it's more polished, because I can even go in with this one and add the other arm coming straight down and bring this one out. But just kind of fiddling around with the shadow, I could begin telling myself what kind of composition I'm looking at. The concentration of blacks versus the concentration of the lights areas, what's the focal point and how well it stands out. So what I've noticed is, so long as I keep the knotwork fairly simplistic and I keep the shadow and the figure itself in the most detail, the figure will stand out. The background will be a bit more concrete, a bit more harsh contrast, just stark lines, and a figure that's more graceful. And that will be the contrast between the background and the foreground, and that way it'll help your eye kind of focus on her. So anyway, I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to go ahead and get working on what I would call the actual final version. So we just pull up a chair here. And normally as I start out a bit loose, but I still try to go from the head to where the rest of the body might be, establishing some manner of curve, some gesture of energy. Just kind of have it flowing from the head down, because I want the idea that she's either ascending or she's descending towards whoever the viewer is. We'll leave it up to interpretation as to whether or not she's coming down for you or whether or not you're just about to miss your chance. So I'm just kind of roughing in basic shapes for where her upper torso would be, where her hips would be. And I'm not going to do much detail beyond the hips, because that's going to be about where the bottom of the shield in the background is going to be, a shield or the crest of some sort. I'll just kind of rough in some sort of crest shape. And once again, I'm not making anything too concrete right now because I'm still just spacing it on the paper itself, as well as spacing it in my mind relative to each other, the background to the foreground image. So even if I've made her head oval far too large, I'm still accounting for the space of how big her hair might be coming out, the shape of her helmet and the size of her helmet. So I'll start putting in some details, and I'll start aligning maybe her focal point. See, I like the idea of her actually looking up, so I'll go with this arched semicircle right there, and I'll kind of establish a brow line. So I know the difference between where her eyes are going to fall and where her eyebrows are actually going to be hoisted above it. And given that distance, we'll also know by the way that they're arced, the eyebrows are actually wrapping around the head, as opposed to just being sort of drawn straight on and then kind of fading away, almost creating a full arc for the whole eyebrow, and then putting the eyes also in that sort of same arc shape. That'll convey the idea that the shape of the head being round is almost sort of tilted up. Like if it was a flat surface, that would be sort of the forehead area, the cheekbone area, coming down kind of like through the cuts of the mouth. And there's the under of the nose, just basic shapes. So somewhere about here would be the chin, as once again her head's tilted up. And you don't want to oblong it or abstract it too much, because then it'll almost kind of become alien, where either her head is too squat and her jaw is too long, or this becomes too squat and then her head, her cranium becomes just too large. Taper the neck down to the shoulders. Now, women's necks, whenever you're drawing a woman, not to say all women are scrawny, and not to say all women are, dainty little twigs, but if you want to accentuate the features of a woman's jawline, if you want to accentuate the features of a woman's or a girl's head, narrowing the neckline will allow you to do that, and then keeping the trapezoids, the trapezius muscles up here, keeping those a bit low on the shoulders will definitely help accentuate the shape of a female. Whereas if you were to be drawing a guy and you just start arcing these from the chin or from the neck down, I mean, that's going to clearly start looking more like a guy, as you're going to have more muscle build. There are plenty of women muscle builders out there, but if you're drawing a more streamlined physique, then that's what I'm going for here. So I'm avoiding adding that much more bulk. So although she's a Valkyrie, she's not exactly one of the male stereotypical berserkers. So I'm just kind of adding in some shape of the breasts. And one of the tricks I was taught is that they're very much like a teardrop from the clavicle outward. Not from the clavicle down in the center. This isn't Total Recall. We don't have a chick with 3 tits here. And you still want to try to keep them as round as possible. And the trick that not a lot of people realize is, instead of just drawing, say, like a soup can for her rib area, a lot of people don't realize it does more than just wrap around that way. But from the top down, it also sort of curves out and down. So it kind of tapers inwards towards the top. So the breast tissue actually hangs in an outward direction, which is the reason why you could almost draw straight through the middle of these teardrops, and you'll come to the point where the nipples themselves are actually located. Once again, on my model, her hair eventually is going to be covering all that up. So it really doesn't matter if I put them in, but that'll give me a reference point to say, well, that's where the hair officially needs to overlap then, right across there, and it'll look more natural. If I drew her hair over here and then never drew the nipples, it wouldn't look very real. Someone would ask, well, where the hell's her nipple? I would say, oh, it's under her hair, but the hair is not drawn in the right spot. So you got to have the hair actually follow right over top where the nipple really is. So a lot of building these drawings, you have to actually construct where it's going to go, even if you're going to erase it and then never see parts of it ever again. So I've kind of constructed where her hair is going to go, and you can easily erase her trapezius muscle, or her clavicle, or collarbone, I mean. So let's start getting into the arms. I'm going to extend her arms out just a little bit, make them a bit more kind of like she's offering herself, and her hands are out almost like she's serving, like offering up freedom or immortality. Basic shapes here for her abdomen is really just two different trapezoids, just one upside down than the other, and then just taper it to a point at the very bottom, and that kind of fills in right here underneath the rib cage area. A little bit of love handles to give her some thickness, and then nice rolling hips. My idea, I'm thinking, even if I have her hair covering up her nipples, I might even give her some kind of corset or some kind of bodice across the center section, some kind of angelic crest in here. Maybe some wings sticking off of it, like that, and then maybe some kind of dress hanging down from underneath it. And topless Valkyrie, why not? It'll be on my body, I want her to be topless. Now when drawing the arms, I don't really know too many other tricks besides wherever the elbow falls is usually right about where the bottom of the rib cage is, and forearms are always usually just a little bit longer than the upper arm. And forearm length down here usually tends to end right about where the bottom of the crotch is, and then your hands sort of extend off of that. Simple boxes for the palm area. Let's give a little hint towards where the fingers would be. All of them matched together create kind of like a tapered shape. So I don't really need to do too much detail there. Okay, I've already drawn in her forehead. I'm going to come up here now and I'm going to taper it a bit more and give her the helmet shape. Cut across the top of her forehead where the band of the helmet would go. Still again put in some kind of insignia or crest on the front of her helmet. And contrary to popular belief, not all Vikings wore horns on their helmets, because even back then it was stupid to wear giant handles on the top of your head if you're going onto a battlefield. So even though it's a Valkyrie, it doesn't mean she has big horns like you would see in a very traditional operatic scenario. Big opera singers. However, Valkyries do have wings on their helmets, so I'm going to add those. I'll bring her hair down on the other side, cover up the nipple over there. And really, when I draw hair, I've kind of picked up and learned from others who tend to draw the hair as if it was chunks of hair, not as though it was one big bed sheet. The way we tend to think of hair hanging off of a woman's head, or even off a guy's head, it tends to hang off very flat, and then mentally we tend to perceive it as just like a sheet of hair. But the more successful artists will break it up a bit more to make it more exciting. And by doing so, it'll actually give it that rolling effect from front to back, and that's where you get all this overlapping and all these multiple different lines. So I'll even add some up here, a bit more lofty. This gives the idea and the feeling of weightlessness, because her hair is not hanging just straight off her head. Although if you go too intense with it, it can start to look a bit too much like Medusa, where you have, just sort of these snake hairs kind of sticking off there. We can give them a bit of character though. Some wiggle and some curl, and you get the idea. Maybe there's some wind effect blowing to this sort of angelic moment. Start dropping the ears on here. Now, because her head's tilted up, where the top of her ears are end up falling lower than where her eyes are. And that'll help create the illusion that her head is tilted backwards, and so therefore where her ears would normally be level at her eye line, her ears are now dropped lower because her eyes are closer to us and thus higher, and her ears then are kind of left down below. tend to try to keep her expression a bit blank. Curving full lips. Put that little undercut just underneath the bottom lip just to hint some thickness. You don't need to draw the whole shape. Her eyes still look a bit mascara heavy, but that's just because I'm just dropping in lead just to sort of find the shape. I'll eventually go over this later. It's one of the tricks I've learned from a lot of other artists too, is that once you get this initial drawing down, you go ahead and just erase the hell out of it. And drop some hair on top of her face, coming out from underneath her helmet. See, in erasing this and dropping all the lines, you'll create more of a ghost image, and then you can go in and be more precise with where exactly the eyes are, where exactly her nostrils would be underneath here. And you could also start being a bit more decisive about where the shadows are, specifically coming from that slight curve there, hint the subtle shape of the forehead. So sort of like the way I just threw a fast sketch on here to create the shape of the breasts. After I would erase it and create what's known as ghost lines, then I would come in here and just be a bit more soft and subtle with these, and not truly complete the shape of the breast. I'll try to move on. I don't want to focus on breast too much. I was known in my life drawing class of finishing the breasts first before I drew the rest of the model. I did it basically as a joke, but then it just kind of became habit. We had like a group challenge where you had to draw a portion of the model and get up and move to the table right next to you, and then continue working on some other artist's piece. Every time I did that, the person who kept following me, she was a nice girl, I can't remember her name though, but she was following me, and every single time she'd hop on a new drawing board, I could hear her kind of chuckle to herself. Every single time she'd get to the board, the breast would just be perfectly shaded and immaculate, and the rest of the thing was still like a stick figure drawing. So that was my gift to her. Here you go. I know you've already got them, but here, have a free view. Okay, well, I'm not really going to focus too much on the background. I'm not really going to do much of that. That I could do on a separate sheet of paper, and then due to the modern age, take computers and just overlap them in Photoshop. That way I can get the best alignment if I want to. I don't have to worry about drawing lines and then erasing and drawing lines and then messing up the hair or where the hair was. So from here, let's see, maybe put in some kind of bracers, some kind of van braces. Give her some kind of design. Make her look as though she's truly Viking or Norwegian. She's armored and battle ready. For a lot of reference on armor, obviously there's plenty of places where you can go. You can search online for armor references, Renaissance fairs if you have one in your local area. For me, I've spent enough time around medieval stuff that I kind of just sort of wing it on some designs, and then I go into real specifics later. Alright, I think I'm going to go ahead and just start dropping shadows on here. That'll be a harsh shadow just directly below the chin. And if I make it more on the right heavy, that'll help define the figure a bit better. As again, because this is going to be a tattoo design, even handing this off to another tattoo artist, you have to acknowledge that they're going to probably add their own creative spin or twist or their own personal way of how they would do locks of hair, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. I'm not getting too married to this specific design, saying, oh, this is exactly how it has to be. Because that's the last thing you want to do is walk to another artist and say, hey, throw away all your years of experience and just ignore what talents you may have uniquely and do it the way I say. Like, that's the last thing you want to do with an artist. So I would gladly walk in and say, hey, take my idea, run with it, add to it. If you're better at Norwegian style Celtic knotwork or Norwegian anything, go for it. So I'm just kind of adding sort of repetitive shapes up here. The best thing I've learned about any design elements that you do, it's really just about repeating shapes. You don't have to come up with something really intricate and swirly and so forth. Just whatever you do on one side, mimic it on the other side. And whatever you do, say from top to bottom, if it's supposed to be balanced from left to right, then balance it top to bottom as well. Whatever you put on the bottom, put on the top, and that'll tend to make it look the most realistic or most accurate. Now for shading something like breast, it's a spherical object, nothing too difficult about it. I mean, you can look in any how-to drawing book and see how you shade an orange, and it's essentially the same thing here. The only difference is acknowledging some kind of underlighting that would be bouncing up from the surface below the breast. So in this case, lighting that may be bouncing up from her rib cage. And then a cast shadow that kind of gets cast between the two breasts, because if light's coming from the left side, then this breast right here is going to cast a shadow into the middle. And sort of across there. And then up here is where the ribs will be exposed again. Have some shadows down the side. Or maybe I'll just do this like her actual abdomen, give her a belly button. Just have her be practically nude. Maybe a bit more curve there. Alright, I started thinking about some different things. I'm going to add kind of a belt buckle down here and give her still some manner of like dressing coming off of her legs, but it's going to be sort of like tied around almost like a sarong. Kind of like a combination of almost like Egyptian style robes and Roman style robes. The trick when drawing fabric is if you're drawing it like a draped fabric, you really got to consider the amount of overlapping that happens. And the overlapping is all based off of bunching. So to figure out the bunching, to decide where all the lines go, you got to figure out which side is larger and which side is being condensed. So in this scenario, if I have like a ring that all this is sort of tied through, sort of draping out of, then the ring being smaller than the original size of the fabric on the outside, then the lines are going to kind of shoot from the smaller side, sort of like sun rays off of the sun itself. You have all these sort of wrinkles deeper and heavier towards the center, and they'll get thinner and lighter as they go towards the outside, because out here is where the fabric is looser, not quite as condensed. So you can represent some of those overlapping layers, ripples and stuff, just with these sort of little wiggly lines on the outside, and create these sort of outward arms of shadow that thin out as they go towards the outside. So here's like the bottom of the fabric, and then what sort of hangs in the middle is sort of the same thing. It's thicker out here, and it's being condensed by going inside this ring right there, or this clasp or something, or brooch. There we go. Very basic shape, and that can have the in part of her body hidden behind the shield, whereas this right here can kind of flow outside of the shield or outside of the crest. Now, keeping with the whole costuming thing, I could also give her some shoulder pads. That'll also give her more of the Viking look or the warrior look. So I'll just basically take the same arch shape of her shoulders, I'll just extend it out beyond it, make it a lot higher, a lot wider, and just kind of cut across the arm for the overlap of where at the bottom of the shoulder armor would be. And once again, it just kind of comes into the filigree that you would lay in here to sort of fill in all the details, whether or not you would do more Celtic loop type stuff, or whether or not you would do almost like dwarven style hatches and X's, very geometric base shapes. We're just kind of roughing in the inside of it, where there's usually like a plate, like a circular plate here, that tends to fall lower into the armpit area. But given that's a female, we could just kind of bump it up and just say it's her breasts that are moving it out of the way. Let's see, in one of the other designs I also had sort of like these fins kind of coming up. And this adds a bit of dimension to them, adds a foreground, and it adds a bit of a background to the actual armor. So we know that these fins are kind of sticking out maybe from behind and sticking out in the foreground. Just some sort of design element. Like I said, it's just about repetitive shapes. They're sort of repeating that. Maybe even give the idea of layers of plates going between these two fins. You know, these sort of descending curves. It's almost like it's flexible. If she were to lift up her arms, it would actually contract or compact. I'll drop some shadows underneath there. Put like little sunbeams right here. A lot of the time as I just sort of start drawing, I'm just kind of letting the ideas flow. So unfortunately, if I stop talking for a while, I apologize. It's just more or less me sort of in the thought of what I need to add at the moment instead of, you know, vocalizing what it is I'm currently doing. Because narrating what you're doing is different than kind of creating on the spot, so it takes different brain wavelength. Alright, now to add a bit of shape to these, I'm going to make these like your classical kind of doily shaped hair. These just big luscious curls. I have a curl outward right there. I'll just give the hint of some 3D shape by adding in these little arcs, which you can also shape and change. So they kind of curve down up here, but then they curve up down here to give the illusion that it's actually curving and changing directions. And then depending on how thick I want to make them, just kind of do it the opposite way. Kind of solidify these things. And given that it's going to be basically a tattoo, it doesn't need to be an exact science. It doesn't really need to look photorealistic. It just has to give the illusion of it. So there it is, sort of like this kind of doily little strand, you know, kind of like paper mache look. Or not paper mache, what am I thinking? Cray paper, yeah. If you've ever seen cray papers for like a birthday party, it kind of has that little spiral shape going on. Something like that. My lead's getting kind of mashed down. It's no longer sharp anymore, so I'm not getting too fine a detail. I'm just going to sharpen it up real quick. So I think I'm going to change up what I'm currently doing with her hands right here. I could go away from this sort of palms up, and oh no, I can't hold all these lines type of look in her face. I can maybe change the position a little bit, maybe have her thumb to the inside, maybe her fingers sort of cast out. Almost like she's focusing on trying to remain elevated or something. Maybe she's using some kind of conjuring skill. I was in a debate once with a commissioner of one of my pieces. I was in a debate once about the positioning of fingers and so forth, and that not all superhumans or mutants or whatever use their hands to conjure things. They don't use their hands to control stuff like their hair. And I think, well, that may be true, but it's a visual medium. You need to sort of tell the story of what's going on. So if the hair's all wavy like up here, we don't know whether or not she's doing that with her mind, if it's the wind. So if you add some other element of her anatomy in a position that looks like it's controlling it, well then, like puppeteering, well then it completes the story, and then we know what's going on. Well, she's controlling her hair. It's not just wind. It's not just a happenstance. She was walking along, got her hair caught up on something. Because she's moving her hand, that means she's doing it. So I could do something like that with this hand. I can even change up this hand over here. Maybe even bring it into the foreground instead of having it come flat down. Maybe give a little bit of that sort of reach. Give her the look of somebody who's actually offering out a hand, as opposed to somebody who just dropped a bunch of lines. That's not even doing too well either. Change it up. Don't be afraid to erase. There used to be an ego I used to have to myself. I wouldn't really tell other people about, but I never really felt like an artist unless I could complete a whole piece without actually erasing. Same as I would have never have used triangle back in the day. I used to think it was some artistic integrity that you would have the skill. You could draw a straight line without any assistance. You didn't need utensils, and I'll never use a smudge stick. And I used to have all of that in mind. But the truth of it is, it's a production art. It's about the product, whereas true art is about the process. So back when I was so overtorn about having the perfect process, of never having to use tools and everything, and that may have been true, but at that point, to the definition of art, I was making it just for myself. I wasn't making any money. Whereas now with production art, you can make almost anything you want. You just have to sustain a bit of the constructive criticism. You have to sustain commissioner's design. You're at the behest of whoever's paying you. Some sort of design on your bracer there. I might even go all the way up to the shoulder with this. Just have her whole arm coming into the foreground. So I'll erase that shoulder pad. So I kind of go right back into throwing the basic shapes on there real quick. Start throwing some of the subtle details back on there, just to get the shape back in again. Oh, this is another thing too. I used to be very rigid on the way I drew. It's like this pride. I will never turn the paper. I will draw it straight on. I will force my hand to draw curves in different directions. And you know what? It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it's a matter of how good the piece looks. That looks a bit better. It looks more like she's offering something out to somebody. So if there was a basic design shape that I keep reusing here, if there was anything, it's the idea of feathers and the sort of wings kind of look. I want Valkyries to have that immersed sense that they can just kind of lift off and take off and flight. So I want almost every inch of them to sort of reek of flight. So that's why their shoulder pads have these sort of like miniature looking wings, even aerodynamic fins if she was actually flying vertically through the air. So now I go into detail with the rest of her curls back here, having all of them become more concrete. Go. And once again, I'm not really going into too much detail. I'm not trying to be too specific with this. If this was a comic book cover, I'd definitely be taking my time with it. But considering this drawing is going to do nothing more than boil down to a big suggestion to hand to a professional tattoo artist. And it's going to be the tattoo artist who ends up doing their style of these sort of doily hairs anyway. And for all I know, theirs may be a whole lot better than mine, so there'll be no point to really go in and just do all that much detail when deep down, they're going to splash on my body with ink, and it's going to be permanent, so they might as well do it their way, the way they're most comfortable with. Just like graphic arts, though, it's just a graphic, it's just an iconic image. It's supposed to look a specific way. It doesn't mean it has to actually be that specific way. Just give the impression of it. Honestly, I don't think I've ever drawn these ever before, so if it looks kind of crappy, I'd explain it. So I found my Achilles heel, though, for comic book drawing, or drawing in general. My Achilles heel is actually chains. I can't draw chains for the life of me. And there was a while where I just got on this huge Ghost Rider kick. Just for some reason, the skulls and everything just started really appealing to me. That's something I actually avoided the entire time I was drawing because I thought I would lose credibility. I thought I would just turn into that kid who sits in his room, doesn't socialize, and draws skulls all the time. Ooh, you know. Before I knew it, I was drawing flaming Harley Davidsons and skulls and leather jackets and stuff. But chains, I just couldn't hack it. Chains just kept looking weird and weird and weird. Thought I was done. I'm just going to add another one here. There we go. On a tattoo anyway, this is going to be on my forearm, so even all this detail that I'll try to drop onto these shoulder pads, it's all going to be for naught if he can't, you know, get it into the skin, he or she, if she can't get it into the skin when doing the actual tattoo. Some of this detail, like these little crosses and stuff, might actually be lost. So once again, I'm just doing this as a loose sketch. I'm not trying to do it as too fine a detail, because I know the detail is actually going to be lost with a tattoo, especially over time. I'm going to come in and spend some time with the eyes directly, and I'm going to try to get it a bit more concrete. Bring our nostrils down a little bit closer to our mouth. Rock out those full lips. And one of the tricks a lot of professional artists will use is they'll pick up the actual drawing and they'll hold it up to the light backwards so they can see the exact same image, but in reverse it's a lot easier for your brain to see the sort of mistakes that you made. But what I'd already noticed ahead of time before I even did that was this right here was a bit narrower than what was on that side, so I just sort of extended it some. So I'm thinking it's pretty good for now. I want to give her actual pupils, but I'm afraid if I give her pupils it'll just ground her a bit too much in reality. Whereas I like the more ghostly aspect that she doesn't have any pupils, maybe just light spewing from her eyeballs or something. So I'm going to leave that as is. And give her eyebrows that faint little glint of hope. There we go. I'm just going to sign it. There we go. Alright. Thank you for joining me for this piece. Feel free to stick around again. This is Lead-Based Studios. And once again, I'm Nick Feitz, and I'll be drawing eventually what'll be the background, the shield, the crest, and all the Celtic knotwork that'll sort of design to look like the feathered wings behind her. But that'll be upcoming in a separate video. So, thanks for sticking around.